The sun hung mercilessly in the sky, a blistering orb that had not relented for months. The small town of Arroyo's Edge lay parched beneath its relentless gaze. Once lush fields now cracked open like the weathered skin of an old man, deep fissures, sprawling across the barren earth, dust swirled constantly in the dry wind, settling on rooftops, streets, and the tired faces of the few remaining residents. Arroyo's Edge was dying. For years, the town had been slipping slowly into ruin, a slow suffocation under the weight of drought. The river that had once carved life through the valley was now a fragile trickle, barely enough to quench the thirst of the ancient oaks that clung stubbornly to the hillsides. Crops failed season after season. Wells ran dry. The air smelled of dust and desperation. In the center of town stood a weathered wooden bench, its paint peeling under the sun. On that bench sat a man named Elias Harper. His eyes were dull, shadowed by years of grief, loss, and regret. He was once the heart of Arroyo's Edge, a farmer whose hands coaxed life from the soil, and whose laugh could lift spirits. But the drought had stolen more than water. It had taken his purpose. Elias's shoulders slumped as he gazed out across the cracked earth where his family's fields had once flourished. The weight of the past year pressed down on him like the merciless sun. His wife had left the town months ago, unable to bear the unending struggle. His son, barely a boy, had fallen ill and passed away last winter. Since then, Elias had become a shadow, wandering the empty streets and waiting for something, anything, to change. The townspeople whispered about him. Once a symbol of strength and resilience, Elias had become a man broken by circumstance. Some said he'd given up, while others pitied him silently, too weary to reach out. The drought had not only cracked the land, but also fractured the hearts of those who depended on it. On this particular day, the wind carried more than dust. A stranger was approaching Arroyo's Edge, a woman whose presence promised change, though no one yet knew it. Her boots kicked up fresh footprints on the dry soil as she walked down the main street, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder filled with tools and seeds. Her eyes shone with determination, a sharp contrast to the resigned gloom that blanketed the town. She paused briefly by the bench where Elias sat, nodding in greeting, but Elias barely noticed. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the earth met the sky in a bleak line. The woman's name was Maya, and she was a botanist and environmentalist who had traveled far to find this forgotten town. She carried with her not only knowledge but hope, the hope that even the driest soil could be revived, and even the most broken hearts could be healed. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cracked ground, the town waited, unsure whether Maya was a savior or just another wanderer passing through. But for Elias, something inside him stirred, a faint flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. The drought was far from over, and the challenges ahead would be immense. But for the first time in years, a seed of hope had been planted in the heart of Arroyo's Edge, and in the heart of a broken man. The morning sun rose slowly over Arroyo's Edge, casting a pale golden light across the cracked earth. The town's few residents stirred awake in their weathered homes, each of them carrying the same quiet weight of uncertainty that had settled over their lives like dust. Maya stood outside the small inn where she had taken a room. She looked out over the main street, feeling the heavy stillness that clung to the place. The air was dry and brittle, and the silence was broken only by the distant caw of a lone crow. The town seemed frozen, as if it was holding its breath, waiting. Her footsteps echoed softly on the cracked pavement as she made her way into the center of town, carrying her canvas bag filled with seeds, tools, and books. She moved with purpose, a sharp contrast to the slow, resigned shuffle of the townspeople who watched her with wary eyes. It wasn't hard to see why they were skeptical. For years, Arroyo's Edge had been promised relief by strangers who arrived with big ideas but left just as quickly. Drought had become their constant companion, a merciless force that no one seemed able to beat. The townsfolk had grown accustomed to disappointment, and many saw Maya's arrival as just another fleeting hope. Maya's first stop was the old community hall, a dusty building that once bustled with town meetings and celebrations but now sat, silent and empty. Inside, she pulled out a tattered map of the region and studied it carefully, tracing the river's path as it dwindled to a thread of water far upstream as she worked. Elias Harper entered quietly, his eyes catching the sight of the determined stranger. He recognized the spark of purpose in her gaze, something he had lost himself. Though his heart was heavy, curiosity drew him closer. Planning to change this place? Elias's voice was rough, carrying years of bitterness. Maya looked up and smiled gently. I'm not here to make promises I can't keep, but I believe this land isn't done yet. With care, it can live again. Elias scoffed softly. That's what they all say. Then they leave when the drought wins. I'm not like the others, Maya replied, her voice steady. I've seen places come back from worse than this. But I can't do it alone. The old man studied her for a long moment, weighing her words. The pain in his eyes was deep, but beneath it flickered a hint of hope. For reasons he didn't fully understand, he found himself wanting to believe. Word of Maya's arrival spread quickly. Some townspeople came by to see the woman who carried seeds and spoke of revival. Others stayed behind closed doors, unwilling, or unable to face another cycle of hope and despair. That afternoon, Maya walked the outskirts of town, examining the cracked soil and withered plants. She knelt to the earth, running her fingers through the dust. Her touch was gentle but purposeful, a silent vow to the land and its people. Elias followed her at a distance, watching as she moved with a strange kind of grace. He remembered when his own hands had been so steady, when he had believed in the future with the same fierce hope. Over the next few days, Maya met with the town council and shared her ideas: water conservation, planting drought-resistant crops, and restoring the natural vegetation that once held the soil together. Her plans were met with a mix of interest and skepticism, but some began to listen. Slowly, the town's walls of resignation began to crack, just like the earth beneath their feet. And as Maya worked tirelessly, Elias found himself drawn into her world, his old wounds opening in unexpected ways. For the first time in a long while, the possibility of healing for the land and for himself seemed within reach. The weeks that followed Maya's arrival were anything but easy. The sun beat down relentlessly on Arroyo's edge, and the drought showed no sign of relenting. Every morning, Maya rose before dawn, heading out into the cracked fields with determination and a growing list of tasks. Her hands dug into the dry earth, planting seeds carefully selected for their hardiness in arid conditions. She carried water from the few remaining wells, rationing it carefully to nurture the fragile sprouts. Each small green shoot that peeked through the dirt felt like a miracle, but miracles were scarce here. The townsfolk watched with a mixture of hope and doubt. Some came to help, others stayed distant, fearing disappointment. The local council offered limited support, their resources drained after years of struggle. But Maya pressed on, her belief unwavering. Elias Harper remained an observer at first, reluctant to involve himself. His hands, once strong and steady, trembled slightly when he tried to help. Old fears gnawed at him, fears that the drought would swallow him whole again, just as it had taken his family and his spirit. One afternoon, Maya found Elias sitting beneath the old oak at the edge of town, staring at the ground. She approached quietly, kneeling beside him. "Why do you stay?" she asked softly. He looked up, eyes shadowed with pain. "Because if I leave, what's left for me here? Nothing." She reached out, placing a hand over his. "Sometimes, the hardest ground to heal is the one beneath our own feet." For days, the two worked side by side. Maya taught Elias how to nurture the soil differently using composting techniques, creating shade to protect young plants, and harvesting dew for irrigation. Slowly, the old farmer's hands began to find purpose again. But nature had its own plans. A week later, a harsh windstorm swept through Arroyo's edge, ripping fragile sprouts from the earth and scattering precious topsoil. The town's spirits sank, the drought feeling more unforgiving than ever. At the community meeting that night, frustration boiled over. Voices rose in anger and despair. "This isn't working," a farmer shouted. "We're wasting time and water on a dream that's already dead." Maya stood calmly, her voice steady. "Healing takes time. The land has suffered for years. We can't expect overnight miracles." Elias spoke up, surprising even himself. "She's right. I've seen what happens when we give up. We need to keep fighting." His words carried weight, reminding the town of the resilience buried beneath their fear. Slowly, the anger subsided, replaced by a tentative resolve. The struggle was far from over. But for the first time, Arroyo's edge began to believe that renewal might be possible, not just for the land, but for themselves. As days turned to weeks, the fragile shoots Maya had planted began to push through the dry soil. Tiny green miracles in a sea of brown. The town started to notice hesitant smiles replaced weary glances, and whispers of hope fluttered like new leaves in a parched forest. Among the hopeful was Elias Harper, who found himself spending more time with Maya. Their shared labor bound them together. But it was the moments between work, the quiet conversations beneath the sun-warmed sky that deepened their connection. One afternoon, after a morning tending to a small patch of hardy wildflowers, Elias wiped the sweat from his brow and settled beside Maya beneath the shade of the old oak. For the first time in years, his voice carried warmth as he spoke. "I didn't always live with this weight," he said, eyes fixed on the horizon where the cracked earth stretched endlessly. "Before the drought, this was a place of laughter, of life. My wife and I dreamed of raising our boy here, teaching him to love the land like I did. But when the rain stopped, everything changed." Maya listened, her gaze steady and kind. "Loss leaves scars that don't always show," she said softly, "but it doesn't have to define us." Elias nodded, a small spark kindling in his chest. "I want to believe that." She shared her own story then, about the years she'd spent working in distant places where the earth was dying, fighting to revive it, how those experiences shaped her, but also left her feeling alone sometimes. "We can't heal the land without healing ourselves," Maya said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "And sometimes, that starts with trusting someone else." In those moments, a fragile bond grew woven from shared pain, hope, and the will to start a new dot together. They began to experiment with more ambitious projects. Maya taught Elias how to collect and store rainwater using simple, sustainable techniques. They planted rows of drought-resistant crops, their roots reaching deeper than anyone expected. The changes were subtle at first. The soil grew softer, less brittle. Small insects returned, buzzing tentatively in the warming air. Birds began to flutter overhead, their songs tentative but real. One morning, Elias found a cluster of wildflowers blooming near the old fence line. Kneeling, he brushed a hand over the petals, tears prickling his eyes. "It's coming back," he whispered. Maya smiled, her heart swelling with pride and something tender she hadn't expected to feel again as the land stirred to life. So too did Elias's spirit. The man who had been broken by drought and grief was beginning to see a future beyond survival, or future shaped by growth, by connection, and by love. The summer stretched on, the relentless sun beating down with no mercy. Despite Maya's efforts and Elias's growing hope, the drought tightened its grip on Arroyo's edge. The land seemed to hang by a fragile thread, and even the bravest hearts began to falter. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered suddenly on the horizon, an unusual sight in these dry months. The townspeople watched nervously as the wind whipped up dust and leaves, the first signs of a coming storm. Yet, with it came a terrible irony. The storm brought more destruction than relief. A fierce, dry lightning storm ignited brush fires in the hills surrounding the town. Flames licked hungrily at the edges of the fields Maya and Elias had so carefully nurtured. Panic spread quickly, and the community scrambled to contain the blaze with buckets of water and shovels beating at the flames. Elias found himself at the front lines, his body moving on instinct as he battled the fire that threatened to undo months of work. Sweat mixed with soot as he fought, the memory of loss fueling his determination. Beside him, Maya coordinated efforts, her voice calm but urgent. "We need to create fire breaks. Keep the flames from reaching the town." The people of Arroyo's edge, once fractured by despair and skepticism, now came together with a single purpose. Farmers, shopkeepers, children, and elders, all united by the threat to their home and the fragile hope Maya and Elias had planted. Hours passed in a haze of smoke and heat. Just when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them, the wind shifted, pushing the flames back toward the dry hills and away from the town. Exhausted but victorious, the community gathered around a smoldering fire pit where the blaze had nearly crossed. The night sky, black and vast, seemed almost peaceful now. Maya looked at Elias, who was leaning heavily against a tree, his face streaked with ash and sweat. In his eyes, she saw not defeat but fierce resolve. "We can't control everything," Elias said quietly, "but we can choose how we respond." "That's right," Maya replied. "This land is tough, and so are we." The fire had tested their strength and unity, but it also revealed something deeper, a shared resilience that could not be broken by drought, fire, or despair. In the days that followed, the town worked tirelessly to rebuild what the flames had taken. The soil, though scorched, began to show signs of life again. The seeds Maya had planted now pushed through the blackened earth with even greater determination. Elias found himself standing taller, the weight on his shoulders lighter. The crisis had reminded him of the power of community, of connection, and of hope. That night, under a sky dusted with stars, Maya and Elias stood side by side, looking out over the land they were fighting to save. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, the future felt bright, as if the land, and their hearts, had finally begun to breathe again. With the fire behind them and the community more united than ever, Arroyo's edge began to change. The earth, still tender from its scars, responded slowly but surely to the care Maya and the townsfolk poured into it. Where once there had been only cracked soil and dust, now shoots of green pushed through. Bold and unyielding, Maya moved through the fields each morning with quiet joy, inspecting each sprout and carefully tending the fragile crops. She worked alongside Elias and the others, sharing knowledge, laughter, and the simple satisfaction of progress. Elias's transformation was the town's quiet miracle. The man who had once sat defeated on the bench now rose before dawn, hands steady and sure. He helped rebuild fences, dug irrigation trenches, and spoke at town meetings, his voice strong and filled with a new kind of hope. One afternoon, he led a group of young farmers to plant a new orchard on the outskirts of town. The saplings were small but resilient, their roots reaching deep into the healing earth. "This is what I want for all of us," Elias said, his gaze sweeping across the hopeful faces. "A future that grows, even after the hardest seasons." The community's spirit lifted in tandem with the land. Neighbors shared stories and food again. Children played in dusty streets now lined with blossoming trees. And the old community hall reopened as a place of gathering and celebration. Maya and Elias often found themselves beneath the sprawling branches of a newly thriving oak, the same tree where their bond had first deepened. The silence between them was no longer heavy but comfortable, filled with the quiet understanding of shared struggle and growth. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting the land in soft gold, Elias took Maya's hand. "Thank you," he said, simply, "for reminding me that even broken things can grow whole again." Maya smiled, her heart full. "And thank you for showing me the strength that comes from holding on." The orchard began to bear fruit, the crops flourished, and water returned steadily to the wells. Arroyo's edge was not just surviving, it was thriving. The drought was not forgotten, but it no longer defined the town or its people. Instead, their story was one of renewal, a testament to resilience, love, and the power of hope. The first rains after years of drought were gentle but steady, like a whispered promise from the sky. They soaked into the thirsty earth of Arroyo's edge, swelling the river once more and filling the wells that had long run dry. The land drank deeply, and in return, it began to sing again. The town was alive. Children chased each other through fields that now shimmered with wildflowers. The orchards bloomed heavy with fruit, and the air was thick with the hum of bees and birdsong. The scent of fresh earth and blooming jasmine filled every corner of the valley, replacing the dust and despair that had once ruled. At the heart of this rebirth was Elias Harper. His face, once etched with grief and defeat, now glowed with quiet joy. The weight that had pressed down on his soul had lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose and peace. He moved through the town with a new energy, a man who had found himself again. Beside him was Maya, whose eyes reflected the same light that danced across the vibrant landscape. Together, they had tended to the land and to each other, their lives intertwined in the shared journey of healing. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting a warm orange glow over the town, Elias and Maya stood on the porch of the old farmhouse. The breeze was soft, carrying with it the sounds of laughter and music from the town square, where the community celebrated their hard-won victory over drought and despair. Elias took Maya's hand in his voice steady and full of hope. "This place, these people, and you brought life back in ways I thought impossible." Maya smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "We brought it back together. The land, the town, and our hearts." The future stretched out before them, bright and boundless. There would still be challenges, seasons of drought and storms to weather, but the foundation was strong. Arroyo's edge had been reborn, a testament to resilience, love, and the power of never giving up. As night fell, stars glittered overhead, silent witnesses to a story of life restored, and hearts mended. In a town that once teetered on the brink, a new beginning had blossomed, one rooted in hope, nurtured by courage, and blossoming with the promise of tomorrow.